my God. Space Ghost, don't do that!
Hello dear viewers, welcome to a video about one of, if not the greatest talk show host ever. Someone that anyone who wanted to be in the late night talk show game would study and admire. A host who all adored and looked up to as a savior of the interview style format. By only asking the really hard-hitting questions that no one would dare to ask. Of course, I can only be talking about Space Ghost Coast to Coast. Show Explored. I'm Andrew Lapamardo, and this is Marvelous Videos. William Street is renowned for producing Adult Swim content, but before William Street was rebranded, it existed as Ghost Planet Industries, and their first show ever was Cartoon Network's Space Ghost Coast to Coast. The show uses characters from the 60s cartoons Space Ghost and Dino Boy, as they are put into a talk show environment as crew members, where they interview celebrities. While the show uses a mix of 60s animation with more advanced animation from the 90s, they also use live-action elements for the celebrity interviews. The dialogues are worked around to make the interview and the celebrity reaction to Space Ghost being annoyed by the villain crew as absurd as possible. This series can be credited for revolutionizing this type of surreal and crude humor for adult animation in the United States, with the fantastic premise of a washed-up superhero retiring and becoming a talk show host. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Zorak,
Blah-de-dee-blah-blah.
and Moltar.
Blah-de-dee-blah.
Blah-de-dee-blah-blah.
What the cartoon television series is all about. Before we get into the gritties of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, let's start with the basics. It all started in the 1960s with Hanna-Barbera Productions creating the superhero known as Space Ghost, or Tad Ghostal, or Thaddeus Bach, who was created by Alex Toth. Just like any other superhero, he had friends and sidekicks, namely Jan, Jace, and Blip the Monkey. Together, they went against outer space supervillains. Because why else would he be a space ghost? Cut to the 90s, Cartoon Network joined the bandwagon. Today it is one of the biggest names in the game and is renowned internationally. But when they started off, this is in late 1992, the situation was obviously very different. Even Amazon used to be a garage bookstore once upon a time. The thing is, Cartoon Network had no original content, except the occasional one-off specials. As a relatively newer channel, they also lacked one of the most important things necessary for building original content: a budget. So, the channel dedicated itself to airing reruns of popular Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers cartoons. For the longest time, the average person has considered cartoons and animation to be something that is made for children. Of course, that is changing, and has changed to a great extent, the groundwork for which was laid down over 30 years ago. Cartoon Network and Adult Swim's Space Ghost Coast to Coast played a substantial role in this. Around this time, American television producer Mike Lazo was asked to craft an adult animated series for Cartoon Network. With their lack of a good budget, creating something from scratch was out of the question. So Laszlo worked with voice actor Andy Murrell and came up with an unusual concept that would not be very expensive. Remember when we spoke about the 60s cartoon Space Ghost and its superhero? Well, that's very relevant right now, as he was brought back, this time to Cartoon Network, for its first adult show. Instead of being a superhero, Space Ghost was turned into a talk show host. And Viola. Space Ghost Coast to Coast was born. The show would feature celebrity interviews, with them being edited in a certain way. It would take out bits and snippets from the interviews of celebrities such as Radiohead's Thom Yorke, Conan O'Brien, Tyra Banks, the Bee Gees, and many more. They would be portrayed as the guest via a television screen who were interviewed in absurd situations, previously by CNN Bureau hired actor students who interviewed the celebrities in character costumes. Meanwhile, Space Ghost questions would be tailored in a way that it could be answered by those very clips of footage, but the absurdity was cranked up to the max. For example, let's assume we ask you something like, how many risks have you taken in your life? And you reply with, quite a few, I don't regret it at all. But when we air this interview, we change our question to, how many people did you cheat on with your spouse? And then your response is, quite a few, I don't regret it at all. The effect of this statement changes remarkably. Moreover, if you happen to be a celebrity known for your frivolous life, it just gets funnier. For the first few seasons, Space Ghost, voiced by George Lowe, approached his guest with the assumption that they were superheroes as well. Because of this, he would ask them about their superpowers. He also underwent internal strife where he could not pick between saving the world and hosting a talk show. But he did seem to do the latter quite diligently, almost as if the fate of the world depended on it. He is also quite egotistical and immature, which contrasts with his braver nature as a superhero, and it only aids the absurd comedy that is used in the show. Space Ghost and his celebrity guest are not the only characters though. He has captured and enslaved one of his outer space villains who are critical to the show, thanks to their crazy shenanigans. Throughout the show, these villains constantly interrupt the flow of the episodes and prove to be quite a nuisance to Space Ghost. The footage of the celebrity interviews is also edited to make it look like they are reacting to the crazy things that are taking place. The juxtaposition of a live-action celebrity versus an animated atmosphere helps create a surreal environment, especially with these very live-action humans reacting to the actions of cartoon characters. It is amped up by the fact that villains are way more interesting and exciting in Space Ghost Coast to Coast than they were in the original Space Ghost cartoons, primarily because they leave no stone unturned to express their hatred towards Space Ghost. Those who rocked with the absurd and surreal nature of the talk show pulled off the interviews a lot better than those who didn't. This is why the Bee Gees interview did not work out, while the episodes with Conan O'Brien or Tom York knocked it out of the park. Apart from dabbling in celebrity interviews, Space Ghost Coast to Coast also used old animation footage from the cartoons that aired in the 60s, and a fair amount of screen time was dedicated to the crew and their internal strife. Even though the original Space Ghost lasted for only 20 episodes, Space Ghost Coast to Coast survived being cancelled twice, and went on to have 11 seasons. The iconic talk show began to air in 1994 and ran till 2008, barring a 2-year hiatus from 2004 to 2006, after which it changed its premise a tad bit. As the seasons went on, the show shifted from Space Ghost asking the celebrities about their superpowers to being the most downright absurd thing ever.
Judy, what sort of superpowers do you possess?
The discomfort of the guest, their awkwardness, and long silences added a cherry on top. It also proved how comedy did not need a punchline to be effective, and that situational comedy and absurdity often worked better than slapstick comedy. This idea is cemented by the younger crowd of today who consider the sitcom Friends to be unfunny, especially with its usage of laugh tracks. While The Office is a huge fan favorite, despite its relatively low budget, Space Ghost Coast to Coast soon managed to become Cartoon Network's flagship series. It also premiered material from other cartoons, namely the Powerpuff Girls, Johnny Bravo, and Dexter's Laboratory. These episodes were set up in the same interview format as the other celebrity guest interviews, with snippets of the show being used and the script mimicking a natural but surreal flow of an interview. It is safe to say that it really helped with promoting these cartoons and giving them much needed traction. Space Ghost Coast to Coast plays a big role when it comes to the conception of Adult Swim as a whole. Back in the day, when streaming was not an option and you had to rely on the television, Cartoon Network unleashed its more raunchy alter ego at night with Adult Swim. And Space Ghost Coast to Coast influenced Adult Swim shows like Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, and C-Lab 2020. In 2001, Adult Swim also aired the anime Cowboy Bebop, which mainly caters to an adult audience. Adult Swim aired more mature cartoons that were targeted towards teens and adults and would often feature violence or dirty jokes that were really inappropriate for children. What is interesting is the fact that Adult Swim did not exist when Space Ghost Coast to Coast began to air. It originally started out as Ghost Planet Industries, which is the production crew behind Space Ghost Coast to Coast. The success of the show caused them to rebrand themselves to William Street. So, in a way, Space Ghost Coast to Coast is an Adult Swim cartoon as the show aired on Cartoon Network from 1994 to 2001, after which it switched to Adult Swim till 2004. It then went on a 2-year hiatus until being aired on Game Tap from 2006 to 2008. With Adult Swim gaining traction and overtaking the slots for weekday nights alongside the weekends, the network got the rights for Family Guy, which had previously been canceled, and today, Family Guy's legacy is one that is known by everyone. We have already mentioned Cowboy Bebop being a show that was aired following the success of Space Ghost Coast to Coast. The thing is, Cowboy Bebop is an anime that is very well suited for the Western audience, especially with its Western influences, episodic nature, and Yoko Kanno's soundtrack that is heavily influenced by the blues and jazz. With its success, Toonami came into the foray, which is like the anime twin of Adult Swim. Toonami was hosted by Moltar, yes, the director of Space Ghost Talk Show, and it aired shows like Sailor Moon and Gundam Wing. This introduced Dragon Ball, whose popularity requires no introduction. And anyone who has watched Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z knows that the show is definitely not made for kids, be it when it comes to sexual humor or violence. Space Ghost Coast to Coast also gave us Cartoon Planet. It is a spin-off and a variety show hosted by the cast of Space Ghost Coast to Coast. All of this combined speaks volumes about the impact that Space Ghost Coast to Coast has had. But what caused the network to want a show like Space Ghost Coast to Coast? They could have gone for a show that catered to children, a talk show with lighthearted themes over an adult show on a new channel that could only air the show at a particular late-night time slot. Well, the head of Cartoon Network himself, Ted Turner, asked for it. He wanted an anime series for a more mature audience. In a way, creating something for kids would require a higher budget because you could not get away with the absurd stuff Space Ghost Coast to Coast is renowned for. Mike Lazo, the senior vice president of Cartoon Network, was tasked with making it work, and he figured out that using their rights to pre-existing cartoons and footage and working their way around it would be the best and the most cost-effective way to approach the show. This was combined with the footage from celebrity live-action interviews. It also took inspiration from the David Letterman-style talk show, where the host being oblivious about the celebrity's antics, prompting them to explain why they did a certain weird thing, works really well. Since Space Ghost obliviousness about his guest is a big part of the show's charm. Space Ghost Coast to Coast works on a concept known as soft world building. To understand what soft world building is, we need to understand hard world building. And the best example of hard world building is J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. For his lore, Tolkien has created a whole new world to the T, crafting languages like Quenya and Sindarin for the elves, among several other things. The main characteristics of hard world building is that no matter how deeply rooted in fantasy your story is, it should be justifiable according to the structure of the world that you have built. On the other hand, soft world building does not have such boundaries. It can exist within a normal world and does not have to comply with any rules. A great example of this would be Studio Ghibli movies like Howl's Moving Castle and Spirited Away. These films do not follow any set boundaries as the audience is consistently exposed to the surreal, which often makes no sense within the world it is in. And yet, no one questions it. Oh, magic exists? Cool. There's an onsen for spirits? No big deal. Space Ghost Coast to Coast is somewhat similar in that sense. It is a talk show within another show, notably a cartoon that interpolates live action into it. Call it showception if you want. The real human guests are just made to accept the fact that they are witnessing cartoon characters from a 60s cartoon interview them while squabbling with one another. Just as Sophie Hatter accepted that magical world of Howl instead of putting emphasis on why these things were happening. If something like that happened in Harry Potter, then according to the boundaries of that world, the Muggles, or the non-magic community, would have a hard time accepting the existence of witches and wizards. With Space Ghost Coast to Coast having its own soft world, they also have their alternate history, which no one questions. But before Space Ghost became the host, the position was meant for Harvey Birdman, with Lokar filling the shoes of Zorak Roberts. But Birdman Coast to Coast did not work out as Birdman was a terrible host, especially with his Sunray-powered superpowers being in conflict with his filming schedule. His loss paved the way for the B-grade superhero that is Space Ghost, who might not have been a top-notch hero, but finally entered the roster of A-listers as a talk show host. Space Ghost's constant interaction with the top celebrities of the 90s catapulted him to success and made him a celebrity in his world. Denzel Washington, or rather his archived footage, appeared as the first guest in the pilot episode of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, giving the talk show a solid start. Generally, every episode would have more than one celebrity. For example, the episode Knifin' Around had Space Ghost interviewing Radiohead's frontman Tom York, who has never written a happy song in his life, or not that we know of. Meanwhile, it is revealed that Space Ghost was married to the Icelandic singer Björk, whose music is critically acclaimed for its experimental and avant-garde nature, as he answered her calls and exhibited generic married man behavior. In this soft world of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, the talk show crew hired people, mainly acting students, to interview the celebrities while wearing strange costumes. This took the Bee Gees by surprise, who laughed throughout their interview, especially with Space Ghost asking them if they had enough oxygen, probably because he thinks that they are in outer space. The Bee Gees cursed through the majority of the interview, and it got so out of hand that only 19 seconds of the footage made it to the final cut. The whole thing with acting students in costume was later changed to be less strange for the celebrities. Other big names like Jim Carrey, Slash, Tyra Banks, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Bill Nye also appeared on the show. The questions were also asked through a phone patch, and the celebrities were asked to simply imagine a situation where they were being interviewed by a superhero. This gave birth to the celebrities looking blankly instead of the interview being a mutual conversation, which only helped in making the absurd humor even more absurd. The Office, being a sitcom, profits off of making the characters break the fourth wall by looking into the camera or talking to them. Space Ghost Coast to Coast does the exact opposite. At a talk show where you expected to look at each other and at the camera to address the audience, not doing so amps up the comic elements. The show stopped airing in 2004 and went on hiatus for 2 years. It returned from 2006 to 2008 as an exclusive 5-minute web series on GameTap, which is Ted Turner's online broadcasting service, with Space Ghost interviewing GameTap's Artist of the Month and other video game industry celebrities. Before Space Ghost Coast to Coast began to air, the show was promoted with a CD soundtrack. Musicians Eddie Hoist and Sonny Chirac were featured on the CD released by Rhino Records. The CD also came with descriptions of the first 30 episodes. A separate seat had Space Ghost using affirmations, which would later become the drops that were being used for radio stations. 2 years after its 1994 release, Space Ghost was featured on the 1996 Planetarium Tour, as it featured several Space Ghost Coast to Coast episodes and even some music videos from the original 60s Space Ghost animated series.
Hey fellas, I know a great Polynesian restaurant up the street.
Cast of the show. We have spoken a lot about Space Ghost, so let's get into the other characters who make up what the show is. Zorak Roberts, voiced by C. Martin Croker, is an alien that resembles a praying mantis, even though, later, that he thought that he was a locust. He is evil enough to eat his own nephew, and he cares a lot for his own life. With mantises eating their mates after intercourse, Zorak decided to stay a virgin. He also despises Space Ghost and is the band leader of his talk show who lives in a keyboard pod. Despite being the physical manifestation of pure evil that he claims to be, Zorak's level of evil has been neutered due to his professional circumstances and enslavement. Then there is Zorak's best friend, Brack, voiced by Andy Murrell, a feline alien who is treated unfairly by both Space Ghost and the other villain, including Zorak, who is supposed to be his best friend. Naturally, he grows resentful towards it and hijacks the show in an episode known as Jerk, as he asks the audience to hail him. You could say that he's a talk show villain with a tragic backstory. He even hijacks the intro and the music for the episode, which really gets under Space Ghost's nerves, because he really cares about the quality of his talk show. There's also Moltar, once again voiced by C. Martin Croker, who acts as the producer and director of the show. Instead of being like an animal or an insect, Moltar is basically made up of lava, or rather molten lava, and wears a containment suit so as though not to be a hazard in his workplace. Despite being lava, he is not hot-headed and is definitely more competent than the other villains. As the director of the show, he uses a single monitor to control all the booths, making him the backbone of Space Ghost Talk Show. There's Lokar, once again voiced by Andy Merrill, who is a locust and another villain. He does not have the best temper, which is characterized by his outburst. He sports a British accent, clearly a terribly fake one at that, and has issues with both Space Ghost and Zorak. Black Widow is a villain, who the other villains dislike. Why, you ask? It is because the villains hate Space Ghost, while Black Widow claims to love him. There's also the cowardly Tonset, who is quite tame as a villain, but has a menacing appearance with his red costume. His gut, which is the product of being overweight, it is often out and he is chided for being a coward. Band leader Zorak has a nephew called Raymond, and Space Ghost likes him a fair bit. However, Zorak, being pure evil, eats Raymond. Metallus is a special in his own right. Whenever he speaks, he uses a reverb-heavy voice with a metallic drone, in true metalhead fashion. Just like the incomprehensible band names of several black metal bands, thanks to their logos, Metallus's way of speaking renders his words incomprehensible as well. But Moltar is probably a true metalhead in the sense that he can understand Metallus. On the other end, we have Space Ghost evil twin, Chad Ghostil, who loves jazz music. Being a hipster, it is also necessary for him to be different and unlike most of the other villains, who can be a bit lame. Chad Ghostil is a total Chad. He is super cool, a complete ladies' man, and great at being evil. Doofenshmirtz better take notes. Comedy shows tend to have renowned bands, Saturday Night Live being one of the most notable examples. For Space Ghost Coast to Coast, that role was filled by the original Way Outs, which is led by Zorak. Most of them are also former villains who have been enslaved by Space Ghost. The screen time of Space Ghost sidekicks from the 60s cartoon, Jan, Jace, and Blip, has been reduced to the Coast to Coast talk show. However, they are still present. Finally, the show features Kirk the Storyteller as a narrator, who reinterprets various episodes and talks about them in retrospect.
Right you are, my little green friend. An evil ploy by your mother.
Your.
Other interesting facts about the cartoon. The original Space Ghost ran for only 20 episodes and had an underwhelming amount of Space Ghost animation, literally less than 90 minutes. However, the older designs were used for Space Ghost Coast to Coast instead of remastered or redesigned modern footage. This was done to make the two footages look remarkably different from each other and to play on the contrast between the two styles. The show also took heavy inspiration from Late Show with David Letterman. Initially, the network executives worked on writing the first 15 episodes, especially with their budget constraints, which also came from the fact that Ted Turner did not want to spend his coins on Cartoon Network. However, its success brought in money, and eventually, writers from The Late Show with David Letterman were hired. Around this time, Space Ghost Coast to Coast had a budget of a whopping $30,000 per episode. This allowed them to hire Emmy-nominated writer Spike Feresten, who wrote Seinfeld's The Soup Nazi episode. Meanwhile, Letterman's former head writer, Steve O'Donnell, also joined the team. Space Ghost Coast to Coast was the first animated talk show ever, and even in terms of comedy, it was the first of its kind in the United States. In a way, that made it a lot more groundbreaking than the absurd comedy that we are exposed to now, even though the latter might be more up the alley of a younger audience. Space Ghost Coast to Coast is kind of like the first phone with a camera. Phones today have better cameras, but they will never have the same impact as the first phone with a camera. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Go ahead. I'll just regenerate.